Lore, not the one that's going to take you to court, but the one that adds extra layers to a game or really any form of world. But in games, it's truly what changes someone from being a casual enjoyer to a genuine fan of the media that they've just taken in. For instance, on a surface level, many people will write off games like Assassin's Creed, Skyrim, or even pieces of media like Star Wars as simply normie trash. But I have to disagree and say that all of these are actually great when they've got their added layers as well. With something like Skyrim, not only do you have a decent overall game, but it also has loads of lore for you to learn about the races within the game, the wars that were going on in present time and in the past. Star Wars feels like a hollow shell of a thing when you're watching just the films, but once you delve deep into something, let's say like the Clone Wars, it adds so much more layers and stories that it just adds to the overall idea of what's going on in the conflict that's going on within this time setting. Truly what lore does is what I mentioned earlier. It changes someone from just being a casual fan who enjoys the settings of something like Assassin's Creed Unity to a genuine fan who loves the lore of the modern day plot, the stories and the characters and the Isu, whatever it might be. And in my mind, I think lore is something that gets overlooked quite often when people are discussing how good a game is, as we think a lot more about the mechanics of games nowadays, or the looks of the game, over what the actual game is trying to tell you with the story and with the world. Now I think to actually talk about this subject, we need to actually talk about what lore is in itself, and also how it's used to truly make people love a world even more. Now the way to explain this is that lore is simply the backbone of whatever game or piece of media that you're taking in. For example, Star Wars, Harry Potter, or Game of Thrones. Which might now confuse you on what I mean by it not being spoken about enough, especially within games. But if I was to give you examples of when things go a little bit off the rails, following what their lore is and story and actually giving that extra level of value to the player, you have something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey or Valhalla, which are great examples. Where yes, both do have elements of what is the lore of Assassin's Creed, however they go very much far off and just alienate a lot of the player base. Or if you want it from, let's say, a TV perspective, then you've got something like the last season of Game of Thrones, where that season is the epitome of what ends up happening when you just end up letting people who aren't going to value the genuine lore to get the thing out quickly. They stray so much that you don't know if it's something that should be truly classified as a genuine addition to the story that has been told already. An example of this would be Star Wars, and more in particular, I mean the sequels, where they stray away and chose to make some choices that deep down really were not a good overall choice for the story, such as the return for Palpatine. However, it did happen. Fans weren't necessarily happy when this happened, and it just seemed random and a bit unnecessary. They decided to just bring back a big villain for the sake of having a big villain. So shows like The Mandalorian are great, however, truly what they are there for is trying to repair the damage that the sequel trilogy caused by just not continuing on, or at least telling a good story with the lore that they had available. Now though, just before we continue, if you do enjoy content like this, then make sure to subscribe to the channel as I'm uploading videos like this every single week. And if you are interested in supporting the channel, I do have channel memberships, which are just £2 a month if you were interested. And also, if you were interested in something that's like a slimline wallet, the minimaldesigns.com is down below. You can check them out. That's my company. But yeah, the two types of media that I want to talk about when it comes to explaining these points a little bit better is going to be Skyrim and Star Wars. Both of these games have groups of people who absolutely hate them and believe that they just absolutely lack depth. However, anyone who is a genuine fan of either two of these things does know that they do have extra layers to them, like Shrek. To begin with, let's talk about Star Wars. I'm a massive nerd for almost anything that talks about Star Wars, comes up about Star Wars, whatever it might be. If it's Star Wars related, I'll gladly be interested. However, I'll admit that the films really don't do a good job of adding loads and loads of layers, but instead just tell stories that they are meant to be telling, so it's kind of understandable why they're there. Similar to how if you play something like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, you're going to be told a great story. However, you don't necessarily get tons and tons of depth and lore backing the idea of who Edward is, and really don't really get much extra outside of the great story. Maybe, you know, you gain the extra bit of something like a sage. However, outside of that, it doesn't add too much. So what you end up going to is another bit of material, such as, let's say, the Assassin's Creed Black Flag book. Or in this sense, for Star Wars on the big screen, you'd end up going to the slightly smaller screen and heading over to something like the TV show. And more in particular, the Clone Wars. I don't mean something like the Mandalorian and stuff, like I don't think they add like tons and tons of layers. I do genuinely think that most of the lore that people love about Star Wars right now comes from them going really more in depth within that show, really, if I'm being honest. I think the Clone Wars deserves so much credit when it comes to how people, especially the fanbase, perceive a lot of what goes on. The Clone Wars ends up showing you a load of stories that the films would love to tell, but due to the length of a film and, the idea of how much they cost, they end up being put on the back burner, and something like a show gets to explore those and be more creative around the idea in the background of all of these characters and the worlds we're exploring. This is what truly makes a lot of people fall in love with the worlds and the characters, as it's adding so much depth to the world you're exploring. The films are more like a canvas, but I'd say the shows are the actual paint. Let's take Darth Maul. In the first film, he's a shell of a character, who has zero depth and almost has just the same amount of level of depth as a person on the side of a shot. But once the Clone Wars came out, he went from being someone that, people thought was cool, looked interesting from that first film, to having a load of depth about the way his character is, and became many people's, including myself, one of their favourite characters that they've ever seen within Star Wars. He went from someone who spoke no words to having loads of layers, from his hatred to Obi-Wan, his desire to make Palpatine proud of him, his fear of the future and what Anakin would become, and his whole reasoning for why he took over Mandalore. All of this is great lore that adds so much depth that it is absurd, and it explains why so many people love things like the Clone Wars, and it ends up keeping them gripped in for hope of what the future of Star Wars could hold if people who were backing those sorts of shows were in charge. Lore allows more time and information to get people genuinely involved in the world on a deeper level. Skyrim does this as well, but I think as it's a game, it does this a little bit differently than, let's say, something like Star Wars, where it's all mainly shows and TV. With a lot of games, you end up learning a lot of lore, mainly from online videos. YouTube is definitely something that I think everyone can agree has really helped games, especially just smaller games to even bigger ones, expanding their reach. YouTube is extremely complementary to all things games. And I'd probably argue as well just the internet in general, but YouTube as well is a big part. With Skyrim, a lot of people will talk about how shallow the world is, which sure, they might have a case to make when it comes to that, but I don't find that an issue just because of the stories that are getting told are normally discussed through the characters as well, but also you can learn a lot of this just by exploring the world. If you're like me and you love watching and enjoying videos discussing things like lore, you'll end up learning about why the War of Skyrim is going on in the first place, which again you can learn in the game. However, videos kind of summarize it in a more neater fashion. However, you'll learn that the Stormcloaks aren't just the racists or that the Imperials are good, but in reality both sides are being played by the Thalmor, who want to dominate over Nirn so they can in turn just control it and sacrifice it to their god in the hopes of becoming a god themselves and or just demigods. You end up learning more about why every single Daedra Lord exists, from things like how they were unwilling to sacrifice themselves for the existence to create the planet that you're on and inhabiting. All of this creates genuine love for the worlds that have been created, because it adds so much more depth. It adds a level of personability to the world, but also it allows people to have a connection, because they also have this feeling as if they know knowledge that others don't. It adds this extra layer of, wow, this world actually genuinely feels alive. Now, what both of these things have in common is that lore is truly what brings life to both of these worlds. Yes, the basic canvas from the mainline films of Star Wars and the game of Skyrim have a world that do feel alive. However, what ends up adding so much more additional value to the player is understanding and knowing a tone of the lore around what world you're exploring. This is one of the reasons why a game like Hogwarts Legacy did so well, is because it's a game that is quite decent overall, but it's nothing truly amazing as a standalone thing. However, because people love the lore and the world of Harry Potter and it really doubles down on this, it ends up adding so much value to people and they absolutely loved it. So with a game like Skyrim, when you're going around the world, I'll end up picking up loads of different things that I've learned throughout this entire experience when it comes to the wars being waged, the races within this game, the reasons behind what is going on, and the inner politics between every single city and so on. All of what you end up learning about the lore in either a game or even from a, let's say, a YouTube video or shows, whatever it might be, whatever media you're consuming, ends up making you feel a level of connection with it and makes you a genuine fan. When a game or show or even a film strays from the lore, people notice, and it makes people have a less joyous experience overall. Lore is the most important thing when it comes to any of these pieces of media to create genuine fans. Which I'll add in here as a non-scripted bit, but I actually think a part of that might just be because as human beings we enjoy drama, and I think lore is in a way drama, I think, maybe? Let me know what you think. I just kind of had this feeling, you know, of like, it's a part of the reason why people love the whole idea of like celebrity drama and so on. Like why some people love that, why some people love books and all. It's like all the lore is in a way just fictional drama and so on. Like, it's something that I think might be the case, but yeah, let me know. People who love Assassin's Creed, for example, love it because it's their childhood, but it's also because they've learned so much about what is going on within the world of Assassin's Creed. Many of those same people don't love the newer games, such as Odyssey, due to how far it stretches away from its lore. People think it's due to the idea of it becoming an RPG. No, it's simply because it's a massive reminder that Ubisoft do not care about this franchise. And the franchise, to begin with, was truly kept up because people enjoyed the experiences of the Assassin's Creed and what it actually had to offer around the stories surrounding the games. Lore is often thrown to one side when discussing games. People love discussing things that they've recently learned. It's why people, when they get into something, let's say like Star Wars or whatever, they want to find other people to talk about it with. Everyone enjoys telling on, or at least continuing on, their knowledge. The reason we end up trusting other people for long stretches of time, for example, when you're watching videos like this, is because the longer that you spend with someone like me, for example, in a video, let's say it's my 3-hour-long video essay about Red Dead, and then you watch another hour-long video essay and so on. Normally, when it comes to psychological perspectives, it takes about 7 hours for you to actually trust someone when it comes to just hearing their voice and so on. Like, you feel that level of connection with the thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's not too far off when it comes to a game, when it comes to its lore and everything from a TV, film, and all of that perspective. The longer we spend within a world, the more fond of it we become. However, when we learn more about the lore within something, we end up feeling way more knowledgeable about something, and it ends up connecting to you in some fashion. It makes you feel as if you know something that others don't. People do often overlook a lot of this, and I think this is like one of the points that I kind of make within my immersion video. It is just because I think a lot of people care more about, oh, the game needs to look amazing, it needs to be technically amazing and all this, and people don't like to think about the stories all the time. A lot of people are willing to overlook a mediocre story if the gameplay is great and if the quality of the game looks amazing. However, to me, I do think that we do need to value genuine worlds having actual stories to tell. Anyway, this isn't me saying that fundamentally every single person in every single studio and so on doesn't care about this. I think lore is very important, and I am very much worried for some games that they hopefully don't just stray away from this idea of following their lore because they want to make some like fancy next level scale up of whatever it is. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, do subscribe for more content like this in the future, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.